Hello, everyone, and welcome to CleverTap webinars. My name is Divya, and I'll be your host for this webinar. Certain housekeeping points before we start. In case you're unable to hear me or Sunil, please let us know if you're facing any issues on the chat option on your Zoom panel. Also, if you have any questions during the webinar, feel free to punch them in the Q&A panel of your Zoom system. We'll be taking all the questions towards the end of the webinar. Without any more ado, the topic for today's webinar is user retention, the mantra for sustainable mobile growth. And we have none other than Mr. Sunil Thomas, CEO and co-founder at CleverTap, to give you some insights on this. Welcome, Sunil, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Divya. I have no idea if people can hear me, but I'm assuming people can. So thank you, everybody, for taking the time to attend this small session. I think I will take between 25 to 30 minutes, and then which means we can have about 15-20 minutes for questions. Of course, both Divya and me are available for questions if you want to do it by email later also. So happy to be here, and I hope I can leave you with something that is, that you can take back and start implementing. So the topic is about user retention, and I want to talk about how this has really become an important piece, in the mobile ecosystem. So it starts with the concept that, really, I want to put this thought in all of your heads that, it's like the world is changing, user retention is now a key part of really growth. Gone are the days when you can just spend, money, energy, resources, no matter what, on trying to acquire new users. People have realized, and it's just simple math, that if you spend equal amount or even half of that money, time, energy, resources on your user retention activities, you will actually end up growing a lot more. This is really all about sustainable growth. This is really for those of you in in a startup phase, in early phases of your sort of consumer applications, if you will. This is about product market fit. If you are able to retain your users, you can be extremely confident that you actually have product market fit in no matter what kind of product that you're building, and so on. So I think the first thought here, there are a few takeaways from what I'd like you to take away. I think the first takeaway that I want to leave in your heads is that think about user retention seriously, because user retention is one of the keys to being sustainable growth, and the world is shifting towards this. And I have some data and data points and all of that, across this next 20 minutes to hopefully, sort of reinforce the problem here. This is the problem. Like if you have a mobile app, you know this very well. 90% of your users are lost in the first 3 months. In fact, it's much worse than this, because literally 80+% or 85% of your users who've installed your app for the first time are lost, within the first 30 days. There are multiple sources of this data. Somebody says 90%, somebody says 95%. It's all the same thing. But except for a very few apps in the world, this is really a problem that you already know if you are in the consumer mobile app space. And this is a real problem. And the good news here is that the rewards are very much worth it. If you fix retention even by a few points, 1%, 3%, 5%, if you fix retention by a small amount, retention rate, then your profitability or your revenue goes, over a slightly longer period of time, right? 2 years or 3 years, really multiplies, 20 times or whatever. So the math here, this is a very simple model, assuming $10 a month per retained user is your monetization ability. And if you have X amount of users to begin with, and you start with a retention rate, you increase the retention rate by like five, like a small percentage, 5%, 10%, and you multiply those rewards. It's like compound interest. These things just keep getting better as time goes on. And in short, the rewards are worth it. Again, we do have a calculator. Happy to share this, offline if you want to. But this is some simple math here, not really very complicated. But the point here, or the takeaway here, is that a small change in retention rates or a small improvement in retention rates significantly improve profit rates by a 20x kind of a multiple over a slightly longer period of time. And in many cases, like, this is the difference between winning and losing. This is what makes winner apps, winners, and loser apps losers, really. And, this is just some industry data. INC, this is a sort of an authority on small and medium businesses, especially across sort of US and European advanced markets, if you will, says very clearly, and they back up with sort of in-depth studies, that 67% more revenue is what you can expect from a repeat customer as compared to a new customer. 67%. That's a massive rate of increase. It's 25 times more expensive to acquire a new customer than retaining your existing base. So think about this. This is Harvard Business Review. Think about this. If you spend $100 on acquisition, and it's 25 times better to retain your existing users, you should funnel, at least a fourth of that acquisition budget into your user retention activities. It'll make a big difference to your growth and profitability and that kind of stuff. Bain and Company, again, this is backed up by a lot of good detail, and it's a publicly available report. 75% increase in profits you can expect by increasing your customer retention rate by just 5%. This is kind of the graph that I showed you in the previous screen, and this is over a 2 or a 3 year period, right? This is a slightly long-term period that like compound interest, as you retain more and more users, the compounding effect makes this happen over a slightly longer period of time. And that's why it's important. And clearly it is like what makes winners and losers, really. And, no matter what app, what industry you're in fact, this is nothing to do with even digital, right? Offline, like stores and bookshops and grocery stores, and everybody's like, this is a big shift. I mean, this is an important thing. And no matter what industry you are, whether you are digital, physical, I know there are not a lot of physical people probably, listening to this, but it's the same problem. I mean, every industry is shifting. There is this new mindset that retention is important. It's important to get to maximize your existing user base. They already have an association with you. They know about you. They've taken the effort to install your app and all that stuff. And it's just much more easier of a problem to retain them than to try to get brand new users. And the best consumer companies in the world are focused on user retention rate. So you saw the leaky bucket problem. Let me show you some examples of completely the opposite thing. Netflix, 91% retention rate. So in a world where most mobile apps lose 90% of their users in less than 3 months, to have a retention rate of 91% year over year is like, it's the way on the other end of that spectrum. Netflix, obviously, is a massive company. 90 million customers watch 120 million hours of content every day. And with that kind of a retention rate is what makes a huge difference to their growth, right? Uber, on the consumer app, it has 80% retention rate. Again, this is not in the US. This is not in one particular geography. This is across the board. Uber is available in more than 65 countries. Uber also has an 89% retention rate for its driver app. So, 80%, 89%, retention rates for both consumer and driver apps across geographies, across languages, across all of these things, with all kinds of intense competition in every geography, is just massively impressive. New kid on the block, relatively at least speaking, Stitch Fix, 30% month 6 retention rate. And again, this is actually the publicly available data is actually retention rate for purchases. So that means 30% of people, sort of purchase again after, in a period of 6 months also. This is really, really big. This is not about just launching the app, just browsing for styles or products or whatever. This is actually making purchases. This is a fairly new thing, new app or brand or whatever you want to call it, at least compared to both Netflix and Uber, and they're hugely successful. Now you can argue, when I talk about this, there is an argument that, hey, these are big companies and sure, they can focus on user retention, they have the resources and all that stuff. But really, my honest argument here is that, they are big companies because they focused on retention. I mean, if you are able to retain 90%, 80%, 30% purchase rate of your users in these kind of, in a yearly or a 6-month time frame, you will become a big company. So it's the chicken and the egg problem. No one knows which came first, but focusing on user retention is a good way. If you want to do that first, in order to become a big company. So what does all this mean for us, right? For the common consumer apps, what does it take? And CleverTap has been in CleverTap has been in business now for like 6 years. And we have some philosophies around this, right? So what does it take for anybody, a consumer brand, to improve retention, to focus on user retention, right? And there are 3 simple steps as far as we can see, or the best practices that we talk about in the world to our customers, and so on. The first thing is around, getting all your user data together, right? Like the better sort of a 360-degree view of your users that you have, right? It significantly helps your focus and your ability to improve your retention rate. And if you think about data silos, there are multiple data silos in many companies, right? Like your analytics platform, whether it's a Google Analytics Premium or a Mixpanel or an Amplitude, or even the analytics part of CleverTap, whatever you use, right? There are if that's different from your email automation system or your push notification system or your SMS text messaging system, you have a problem. You've got to have your open sort of message open activity, your click through activity, all of that funneling back into your analytics system. You've got to have your analytics data, like when the user launched the app, when the user purchased something, did something, all of that flowing into your marketing automation system in almost real time to make the mobile world or the mobile apps interesting, right? So if you have a silo or a sort of a batch activity to synchronize data between your analytics platform, your marketing automation platform, you have a problem in trying to fix user retention. If you have another very common silo is to have different marketing automation tools per channel, right? You have a different system for email because that started like 5 years ago, 10 years ago. You have a different system for push notifications because it was built later. You have a different system for text messages because that's like transactional in nature, or whatever it is, OTP, password, things like that are being sent there. You have a problem because you have different, marketing automation tools, if you will, per channel. Your teams tend to be different. Because teams tend to be different, this eventually leads to the case where the messages that you send per channel almost end up contradicting each other. You get a 20% discount on a push message, but you get a 15% or a 25% discount on email later. Like, so it's just this, and this is at least a good case where it is a discount, but many times you get conflicting messages. The email is talking about your customer service call where you were really angry and upset about some product delivery that was not good, and at the same time your in-app or push notification is asking you to like rate the app. So it ends up being very conflicting, just because you have silos in tools, you end up having silos in teams, and you got to sort of manage around all that stuff. I don't even want to get into A/B testing, but doing A/B testing, I don't know how many of you do it, but it's always good to test different things, and doing A/B testing also in a silo without all that data, like who liked variant B, who liked variant C, who liked variant A, flowing into your analytic system, so that over a longer term period you can figure out whether people who like variant B are your most profitable users and things like that. It's just data silos that you sort of end up losing if you have them in silos. So the first step here really is to try as much as possible to eliminate user data silos, to get a 360-degree view of your user, no matter what the touch points are. The second big step is to align all your activity on 3 core metrics. Now, you're campaigning, you're doing all kinds of sort of loyalty programs, rewards, reactivation campaigns, onboarding campaigns, all of this kind of stuff. But if you think of campaigns, whether it's email, push notifications, whatever the channel is, in-app messages, if you think of campaigns across the board, and you just say, okay, I send 20 campaigns a month and I'm very happy about that, or I send, I have a click-through rate of like 12%, or I have a open rate of like 35%, and you're happy with that, that is actually, ends up being a little short-term view of all the campaigning activity. So you got to align it on a slightly bigger thing. You've got to answer questions like, have the 20 campaigns that I sent out, in the last month, how have they affected my monthly retention rate or weekly retention rate, or how have they affected my key conversion rates, whether it's a conversion rate from being a free subscriber to a paid subscriber, if you're some sort of a media, subscription app, or if it's a conversion rate from sort of adding something to cart to purchasing, if you're an e-commerce app, or just even simply if it's a conversion rate from, installing the app to registering, giving sort of your registering with the app, so you're not anonymous anymore. So every business, every app has 2 or 3 or handful of like key conversion rates that you've got to identify what they are. These are the conversion rates that if you change, make a big difference in your revenue, in your growth. And you've got to somehow measure the activity of all your campaigns on those conversion rates. Every app, depending on what vertical, what category, has some sort of a retention rate metric, whether it's monthly, whether it's weekly, whether it's like day 3, whether it's day 7, whether it's day 30. No matter what it is, like, you've got to identify what your key retention rate is. And again, the whole point of alignment is that all of your sort of marketing, campaigning activity needs to try to measure what the effect on that key conversion, on that retention rate is. Third thing is lifetime value. It's kind of a lagging indicator. Obviously, if you retain more customers, the lifetime value, they will actually end up buying more or subscribing more or clicking on more ads or all of those things, whatever your monetization mechanism is. But if you just focus on lifetime value, it ends up, it is actually a lagging indicator. So you will only know that later. And that's the reason why the other 2 are important. You've got to try to improve your retention rate. You try to improve your key conversion rates, and obviously your key lifetime value then increases over time. That's the second step. And the third step is really to adopt this sort of mindset of experimentation, right? Jeff Bezos is one of the sort of the proponents of like experimentation. Amazon in different formats, in different forms, AWS or what have you, the consumer side of it, just does massive amount of experimentation, right? It's just in their mindset, it's in that. And this is what you need. I mean, we talked about Uber, but the honest truth is that what works for Uber, doesn't really work for Lyft or doesn't really work for Ola or Gojek or whatever, because it's a different geographies, there are different audiences, and it's just like it's a very, unfortunately, there is no magic wand here. There is no spell that you can apply and your retention's improved. It's a lot about experimentation. It's a lot about finding out what your users like, what are the key what changes these key metrics, and so on. And to uncover them or discover them over time, you need a sort of a platform, if you will, that helps you do that. So those are the three big steps in what means what how you can sort of work on user retention. And as you choose your market, sort of your marketing platforms or your martech platforms, there are three key steps in this. User segmentation is the biggest differentiator, and I have some segmentation strategies in the next slide that I'll talk a little bit about. But if you understand your users and you're able to break them up into smaller groups that are similar, then you have a lot of ability to sort of personalize and engage them in ways that helps your retention metrics. And that's key. So while there's a lot of manual sort of user segmentation that people do, that's doesn't scale beyond a point. You cannot have teams that are like hundreds of people all sort of manually segmenting. You cannot have almost creativity to figure out all the possible combinations of how can I segment my users. Should I separate males from females? Should I separate via geography? Should I separate based on behavior? Should I separate based on a combination of the above? Should I separate based on frequency of use? Should I separate based on whether they purchased or not? It's just like impossible. The combinations are way too much to try to handle this manually. So if you get a platform that can do a lot of these things automatically, different algorithms, it'll help your it's just much more effective in order to work on your core metrics. We talked a little bit about data silos, but again, this is an important thing. You've got to bring your data together in some sort of a customer data platform. That's the term these days that's being used for CRMs and so on. But there's got to be somewhere where you stream, where you put together all your customer data platform in a way that it's actionable, that you can slice and dice it, that you can discover patterns in it, and so on. And you've got to engage across multiple channels. Again, we talked a little bit about silos. It's not that you're sending out email messages and you're also sending out push notification. That does not make it omni-channel. That is almost like multi-channel, might be a better word for it. But the omni-channel experience is when you really orchestrate all your messaging across multiple channels. So there are just some messages that are more relevant, in a particular channel, and that's what you need to hit at. Uber, imagine there is an Uber message or an Ola message, right? That your cab is arrived, or that your cab is arriving soon within 5 minutes. Imagine getting that message instead of a sort of a push notification. Imagine getting that message on an email, right? It just doesn't make any sense. You're not going to read it. You're somewhere in an airport, maybe in a different country, etc., etc., and it just doesn't make any sense to get it that way. Your flight, United Airlines or Air India, whatever. Like if your gate has changed from like number 73 to like 12, that message comes via text, at least a lot in the US. And again, if that message comes by email, there is a 99% chance that you're not going to read it. So omni-channel engagement is really about what the message is, what your engagement strategy is, what is appropriate. Is your user at office, on his desktop when that message reaches, or is he out in a bus or a train or a plane or whatever when that message reaches? And there's a lot of thinking around that you need to do to pick the right channel and to orchestrate all these messages, right? And user segmentation, right? So there are three key, sort of best practices that we share a lot. Obviously, CleverTap has a lot of these things in the product and so on, but this is not about that. Irrespective of the tools or the MarTech stack that you use, I very, very strongly recommend certain segmentation techniques that'll just be very, very useful. You'll see the value, you'll see the uplift in your retention metrics almost immediately. The first is a segmentation technique based on sort of recency and frequency of use, right? Like if you read the material on RFM, this actually, and you plot every user based on how recently you've seen them, meaning I've seen Sunil yesterday, or I saw Sunil 3 months ago, or I saw Sunil 6 months ago, or I saw Sunil like 2 years ago, makes a big difference in how you communicate with Sunil. It's just it's a very intuitive thing. You talk to your best friend 5 times every day, your conversations are very different as opposed to the same best friend that you haven't met now for like 5 years. Your conversation is going to be very different. So that's recency of use. Frequency of use is, given a particular time period, the last 6 months, the last 3 months, again, depending on your app or the category. If I've seen a particular user 10 times in the last 3 months versus like once in the last 3 months versus like 100 times in the last 3 months, that can also determine my conversation, how contextual and what kind of conversation I can have with that person. So RFM divides your whole user base into 10 distinct segments. At sort of the top end of that segment are your champion users and your loyal customers and so on. These are people with very high recency and very high frequency scores. And at the bottom end of the spectrum is your at risk and hibernating users. These are 4 different segments actually. And these are people like your hibernating people are users with like very low recency score and very low frequency score. And again, if you think of simple campaigns, you want to run loyalty rewards program, that's what you run against your champions and loyal users. You want to run reactivation programs, you run it with your at-risk or hibernating users. You want to give offers out, you figure out where to give it for, right? You want to take surveys, or you want to sort of, do NPS studies, or even just like, send out a campaign for people to rate your app in the app stores. You can send it to your champion users and so on, right? So having these segments sort of automatically generated and dynamically being updated helps a lot with your sort of retention activities and just your concept of your relevance of your campaigns, if you will. So that's a very, very common popular used segmentation technique framework, if you will. The second one, we've developed this actually with one of our partners. This thing is called an AIC framework. AIC, we don't have a nice sexy name for this, but it stands for awareness, interest, and converted. Think of it like a triangle. You have millions of users or hundreds of thousands of users. At the bottom of the triangle is the bigger set of users. And these are people who are aware of you, meaning they launch your app once in a while, they visit your website once in a while, kind of a thing, but they end up not doing anything much. The second layer, if you will, is a slightly smaller user set. And these are people who are interested in you. So not only do they launch the app, but they actually search, they browse, they listen to certain videos, they do something more than just sort of launching the app and getting to the homepage kind of a thing. So these are people who are slightly better than aware. These are people who are slightly interested. They may or may not have purchased yet, but there's a level there that is interested, not yet purchased kind of a thing. And then you finally have your converted users, and whatever your definition is. This converted could be people who've made one purchase versus people who've made 5 purchases, people who've subscribed, people who've actually, registered. Again, it depends on your app, depends on your category. But if you break your user base into these 3 very, very kind of basic segments, you can now work on them much more effectively. People who are aware of you, you try to get them interested in you. You don't try to get them to convert or purchase right away. People who are interested in you, and especially you combine it with like recency of use, etc., you can try to get them to convert much more easier than you can get sort of the lower level aware people to convert, so to speak. The third sort of segmentation strategy, again, many tools, you got to pick the tools that provide this. This is a little bit of sort of predictive models or intent and so on. So if you have a platform that has the ability to sort of create intent-based segments or sort of predict what people are going to do. We at CleverTap do it, this way that we break you pick the action. It could be a negative action, meaning uninstall the app, to a positive action, make a purchase for a specific category of products or whatever. And if you break the user base into sort of the people that are most likely to do that action, moderately likely to do that action, least likely to do that action, you just have a very, very powerful sort of framework to engage these people. So if you get like these 2,000 people are most likely to uninstall your app within the next 30 days, now you can do a lot of interesting things with them. Or these people are like, moderately likely to purchase something. That's the people that you sort of, do the little offers with and so on, right? So again, knowing intent can be very, very powerful uh, of a user, whether it's intent to sleep, intent to wake up, intent to purchase, intent to convert, no matter what action. You can actually use that very, very powerfully in your segmentation and hence in your sort of retention techniques. And really, this is a new way of thinking. I mean, it's not like there are four pillars to this game. I mean, it's the analytics part, right, where you understand who your users are, what they do, etc., etc. Then you have your segmentation part, which is, now that I understand my users, who they are, where they are stuck at in their life cycle stage, and so on. Now I can actually break them up into smaller pieces that I can like sort of work with, that I can personalize for, that I can reach out to in a very relevant and contextual way. Then you have, the sort of the marketing automation, if you will. These are your campaigns and user journeys and your omni-channel things like that. And then, a lot of you probably do A/B testing. Some don't. But at the end of it, these are four things that generally people do. But the idea here is that you think of it as like one puzzle. These are four pieces of, to be honest, the same puzzle. And if you can put it around, and if you can align it, if you can orchestrate these four big puzzles in a way that, data is flowing seamlessly together, you're able to measure the effectivity of all your marketing automation activity towards retention and all of that. If you put these things together with a bigger umbrella of solving for user retention, you will do really well. It is a different way of thinking. It is doing the same core basic actions, but in a way that it is much more seamless, and it is much more sort of unified, and it is much more towards a bigger cause, and that cause is user retention. And we talked a little bit about it. We've done this across verticals, across logos. We've done it at scale, and it helps. I don't really have to go through a lot of case studies, but I have a couple here that could be interesting. Hotstar, 12% higher average watch time per session by focusing on these kind of things. They use a lot of RFM based segmentation. They measure it with cohorts and so on. 12% average watch time per session adds up to a lot of increased watch time per week, per month, per year at their scale. Dream 11, 5 times more user retained with an improved onboarding flow. Just a simple thing. And 70% inactive and churned user re-engaged with campaigns, and campaigns that are dynamically, set to their at-risk users and so on. So again, these are massive numbers. If you can retain 5 times more users with simple onboarding flows, everyone will do it very easily. Fandango, ticketing site across, multiple countries. 7% higher revenue and lifetime value, again, because of simple segmentation and relevant campaigns. Gojek, it's the Uber of Indonesia. If a lot of you know it, 4 times higher conversion rates with just A/B testing and figuring out like the right message at the right time, kind of a thing. So again, a lot of the principles of like, there's got to be a bigger goal. That goal is retention. You've got to work on sort of user segmentation, have some framework, and have a way to sort of align all your campaign activities, all your marketing automation activities to that framework, and you'll do well. And that's really what I had. Happy to take questions. I think Divya is going to coordinate questions. I can't read the chat channel at the same time that I'm sort of transmitting or projecting my screen. So I'll wait for Divya's cues for questions. But please let me know your questions. Divya is at Divya at CleverTap.com. I'm at Sunil at CleverTap.com. Happy to answer these even offline as you want. I'll pause and over to you, Divya.
Yeah, that was a wonderful presentation, and I already have a few questions in front of me. So Andrew has asked us, what are the features that can specifically help us with user retention?
Thank you, Andrew. I think the features are really around user segmentation and the ability to measure the effect of all your campaigns into, to your core metrics. So identify your core metrics first of all, and you've got to be able to measure the effect on those core metrics by all your campaigns. And that's really the thing. I mean, you think about it, there are four like pillars that I want to call, right, that you need to solve for user retention. One is the analytics piece where you understand your users. Second is the segmentation piece where you break them down into smaller pieces. The third is the marketing automation piece that you send out campaigns and journeys and so on. And the fourth is like this sort of A/B testing or native UI experiences that you can change for different users. But the key thing is, like, as you send out campaigns after campaigns after campaigns in your marketing automation part of, on that pillar, you've got to know the impact on your retention rates or your key conversion rates or whatever. All of the 30 campaigns that you sent out in the last like 3 months, have they really improved your conversions, right? That's what the effect you've got to measure, because not all campaigns are about offers and, hey, here's some 20% discount and all that. You'll really have a bad experience. It's the relevant message. It's the gate change. It's the fact that, my gate has changed from 12 to 73. It's the fact that my Uber is like 5 minutes away. It's the fact that the order that the food that I ordered at Zomato has left the kitchen. These kind of things are what's like important. Then of course you can sort of mix it up with offers and discounts and all of that. But the key things, the user segmentation and the ability to measure the impact on these key metrics.
Okay, moving forward, we have two questions from two different users, but both are around segmentation strategies. So we've been asked which of the segmentation strategies is preferred by us and those that you have mentioned. And an anonymous user has asked us, is it okay to segment the user base based on specific actions that they have taken after they have received a campaign?
So yes, I mean, which of these are, it really depends. So two questions, and I'll take them slightly separately. One is which of these, are better or something. I really, it's a hard question because it's really about experimentation and it's really about what works for you. RFM based segments are very standard in the sense that, with champions, there are 10 specific things that you can do. With your loyal users, there are, 10 specific things that you can do. With your new users, there are 10 specific things that you can do, and so on, right? With your at-risk users, there are 10 specific things that you can do. So it's easy to start off like loyalty rewards programs or reactivation program, meaning what I mean by 10 specific things, it's like, increasing app store ratings or running some loyalty programs, running some offers, referral programs, reactivation programs, these kind of things. It's a good way to like start it off because it's kind of, there's a lot of sort of material and prescription that you can start off with. So I think if you don't do anything, RFM is a great starting point. Intent's harder because not because the prediction is hard, but because many people are not used to knowing intent and what to do with it. So it's it takes a little more creativity, but it's very, very powerful in the sense, really, if, using intent-based segments actually have the most dramatic effect in terms of monetization and so on. But it's hard to use because there is a little bit of creativity involved. Like, now that people are going to purchase something, what do you do, right? Like, do you leave them alone, meaning don't send them any campaign because anyway they're going to purchase? Or do you actually try to bundle the offer to increase the cart size, right? Those are the people, they're anyway going to purchase. So why don't you send them an offer saying, A plus B is now a better combination, right? Like, give a discount on increasing the cart size. So there's just different ways to do this, but it takes a little bit of creativity. And awareness interest converted is just some simple life cycle stages without getting complex. So I would pick, if you don't do anything, I think RFM is the best way to start. It's easiest. Intent is kind of the hardest, I think, not because of the technology limitations, but because of the creativity that you can use to it. Now, the second question was based on, sort of behavior and like, after campaigns, should you segment, or can you segment, or whatever? And I think the answer is yes. I mean, the more you segment, honestly, in consumer application where hundreds of thousands of users or millions of users, whatever your scale is, tens of thousands of users, it doesn't matter. The more you can segment, the fundamental principle is that the more finer or micro segments that you can create, the better chance you have at real personalization, at real context, at real relevancy of messages, and so on. People just struggle because it takes work and it takes effort. You've got to create, there's graphics and creatives to be made. You've got to think of like what campaigns for these micro segments. So obviously the easier way is, if I have two segments, I have two campaigns, right? Men versus women. Sure, it's easy. If I have 12 different segments, I've got to kind of think of 12 different campaigns. So that's why, like, if you are manually segmenting as well as creating campaigns, it's harder. If you have some help with sort of automatic or data science related, machine learning related, AI related segments, you have half the problem only to worry about. So yes, you can, totally, and you should, but it depends on your sort of bandwidth and resources and team size and creativity in your organization, really. Divya?
Yes, moving on to the next question. How do you manage frequency of push, email, in-app, and everything else to make sure people don't find it intrusive and yet also engaging?
Yeah, and that's a great question. I am not sure that it's a frequency that is the real problem. It is the type of campaigns that is the real problem. Like, every time you book an Uber, it could be 10 times a day, and you get the message saying your Uber is like now arrived, or it's like 2 minutes away. You don't have any problem with that. So it's not about like the frequency, really. Every time you transfer money from your bank account, or you receive money in your bank account, you don't have any problem with that notification. People could be sending you a lot of money, right? So the whole, like, the trick of this game is that, but of course, if you, the other extreme of that is you send out 10 offers a day, right? And people, that's not going to work. So I don't know if there is any rule on the frequency of messages. I really think that there is a rule, or there is a mix of messages that is more important than the frequency of messages. And that's the crux of the issue. I think you've really got to think of messaging as just an extension of your product. It's really your product. It's really not like spam. It's not really marketing alone and so on. It's an extension of your product or your brand. Think of it that way. When the user is not in your brand, right? It is an extension because you can reach out to your users without them being in your app, right? Or on your website and so on. So if you think of messaging as not purely marketing, but if you think of messaging as an extension of your brand or your product, you will do fine. You don't have to worry about frequency that much.
We'll take just one last question before we close the questions. All the other questions, we'll make sure that you get the answers, and you can expect emails from divya@clevertap.com with answers to your question. The last question that we are taking is, do you have any strategies that you propose for user retention in the streaming space, in the OTT and streaming space?
Meaning, yes, and I think it's not very different, right? I mean, you've just got to experiment. You've got to use the same strategies, really. I think it's about like, what are your metrics, and your metrics around retention rate. Maybe it's almost a daily retention rate that you want to. If you look at sort of the three core metrics, right? Yeah, first, identify them. If you're streaming app, you want people to come back on a daily frequency. Maybe that's your daily retention rate is what you want to like really measure, right? Your key conversion rates, again, depends if it's a free app, if it's a subscribed app, if it's a paid app, whatever. So you got a key conversion rate between your freemium users converting to sort of subscribers, if you will. And again, if it's lifetime value, again, depends on the model, right? If you are an ad driven streaming app with a lot of free content, but you monetize using ads or the things like that, then you want watch time to be your thing. If you are a subscription based app, you've got to then your subscription revenue is what counts, right? So I think, I mean, there's nothing really that I'm not an expert in streaming apps, nor I'm an expert in e-commerce, nor I'm an expert in dating apps or whatever. The fact is that we've seen this to be broadly applicable principles. You align or you decide on what your three core metrics in these three sort of buckets are. What's your retention rate? What are your key conversion rates? 2 or 3. What is your lifetime value? And then you experiment a lot with segmentation, with different campaigns to sort of see what affects those really. Increasing watch time can be done by content recommendations. It can be done by using past behavior, behavioral history, and categories of what people watch, and sort of recommending stuff that is similar. It can be done by following up on episodes, right? You've seen episode number 3, 1, 2, and 3, so now you can sort of keep pushing 4 or whatever. There are multiple techniques that you can use to sort of get people to watch more things or to put ideas in front of people to watch, but you've really got to figure it out. It's a hard question without knowing a lot of the business context.
So with this, we'll bring an end to this webinar. Thank you everyone for joining us for this webinar, and we hope to see you in all our future webinars. Thank you, Sunil, for taking this webinar. It was a brilliant one.
Thank you, Divya. Thank you everybody for attending. I know it's the middle of the day, it's hard, but thank you for the time.
Thank you everyone, and have a great day ahead.